May the virtual light from this flame remind us that every one of us can bring the light of love to the world. May it be a symbol that every heart can burn bright with joy, peace, and harmony. May the wisdom of ages speak to us through this flame and stay in us. Every one of us can be a blessing to the world. And so I say, as we enter this shared virtual sacred space, let us renew both our commitment and our covenant. There are those among us who have endured a loss in the past week. May their hope be uplifted again in this community of faith. May they find renewed strength. There are those among us who have wrestled with questions that seem to have no answer this past week. May they find sanctuary in this community of faith. There are those among us who have cherished an unexpected joy in the past week. May their gladness be celebrated. As we commit to continue our free and responsible search for truth, may we covenant to honor the many paths that have led us to this community. May it be so. This poem by Rabbi Lawrence Kushner is one that I really love because it reminds me of the impact that we all have on one another and how our very presence in each other's lives offers so much. I invite you to consider this poem the next time you question your impact on the world around you. There may be golden ripples from your action that you could have no way of ever knowing. Each lifetime is the piece of a jigsaw puzzle. For some, there are more pieces. For others, the puzzle is more difficult to assemble. Some seem to be born with a nearly completed puzzle, and so it goes. Souls go this way and that, trying to assemble the myriad parts. But know this, no one has within themselves all the pieces to their puzzle. Everyone carries with them at least one, and probably many pieces to someone else's puzzle. Sometimes they know it, sometimes they don't. And when you present your piece to another, whether you know it or not, whether they know it or not, you are a messenger from the Most High. This sermon today, forgiving and letting go. Forgiveness isn't something that's discussed much among Unitarian Universalists. And I think that's because it's associated with concepts like salvation and surrender. These are actions that belong in mainstream Trinitarian sector or with the Jewish faith during the season of the high holy days of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. However, forgiveness is not unique to any religion or to people who are religious. The practice of forgiveness is to spiritual health that exercise is to physical health. In Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, forgiveness occurs in the context of reconciling. And in many Eastern traditions, forgiveness is urged not out of sense of duty or obligation, but for one's own peace. Forgiveness isn't about denying or forgetting, nor is it simply saying that everything is okay and excusing an action or explaining it away. Nor is it about letting people off the hook from being accountable for their wrongdoing. So you ask, what is forgiveness? Well, it's a response to being wronged that acknowledges the wrongfulness of the action and that each of us is imperfect and flawed in some way. because we're all human. But forgiveness is not instinctual for most of us, because when we're wronged, we have the tendency to get angry and want to retaliate. Hurt and anger are like fires that consume and destroy everything they touch. However, the destructive power is unleashed not only on the object of the offense, but on the person of the offended and all of those that are around them. One can never be healed of hurt and pain unless there is forgiveness. To forgive is to free ourselves from the power another has over us. And ironically, often that individual may not even be aware of that power. Many years ago, Oprah Winfrey told a story on the power of forgiveness, and she related an incident that happened to her. She says that she and a friend had a falling out over some minor incident, and for a couple of years, they didn't speak to each other. Oprah continued her story, telling us that one day she spotted her former friend on the street with a companion by her side. And the woman was laughing and talking, appearing so happy and carefree. And according to Oprah, that became her aha moment. And she thought, I have allowed someone to have power over me without them ever knowing it. You see, in forgiveness, we release ourselves from the bond of another's actions. Ultimately, it's the forgiver who becomes the beneficiary of the work on liberation and freedom. Although contemporary society encourages us to smooth over and deny or forget indiscretions and exploitation of others, we see that on the news feeds every day, particularly with elected officials, both locally and nationally, as they try to convince constituents to overlook behaviors and criminal acts that ordinary citizens would be vilified and arrested for. Like the disappointment and betrayal that so many of us feel because of the recent insurrection at the Capitol building and failure of elected officials voting to impeach the former president for his direct involvement in it. It takes a lot of energy to remain angry. And when our emotions are being fueled by anger, we don't think clearly. But I must say that with few exceptions, connections through social media have acted as a release valve. So that for the most part, at least many of the people that I know aren't keeping the pain locked away. And that's a good thing. Because when we keep the pain locked away in the depths of our being, it only changes us into spiteful human beings. And we become prisoners of that anger. Some people assert that forgiveness is a sign of weakness. But if there ever was a case of that being untrue, it's the case of Nelson Mandela. Wrongfully imprisoned for 27 years. Following his release, Mandela brought about change of power with remarkably little violence. Because rather than forming a criminal tribunal, the government set up a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He informed that even in the grimmest times during those 27 years, he and his comrades were pushed to their limits, he would see a glimmer of humanity in one of the guards, perhaps for just a second. But he continued, it was enough to reassure and keep him going. Mandela said that deep down in every human heart, there is mercy and generosity. Our own Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. also held that belief and informed that forgiveness is not an occasional act, but a constant attitude. Just as we understand that only light can drive out darkness, only love can drive out hate. People aren't born with hatred inside. Hatred is something that is learned. So, following that line of thinking, people can also learn to love, but it might take longer for some than others. In his book on forgiveness, Patrick Miller tells us that chronic hatred begins when someone attacks, someone suffers, and no one forgives. But forgiveness means opening the heart. Now, theoretically, we understand that concept, and forgiveness makes sense on a broad spectrum. But it may be challenging to understand if we haven't experienced life-threatening wrongs to our person that caused permanent damage. I've never been wrongly accused of a crime or had to sit across from someone who took the life of a loved one. So I don't know how long it would take for me to let go of that kind of anger and pain. Therefore, I won't insult your intelligence by giving a list of the people who have. But I know that forgiveness is first and foremost a gift to ourselves. It doesn't mean forgetting, because for most of us, the advice to forgive and forget is often totally unrealistic. And forgiving another person doesn't necessarily mean we will reconcile a relationship, nor that a person has apologized or even asked to be forgiven. But if we insist that another person must acknowledge wrongdoing and make amends before we let go of our anger, resentment, and bitterness, we are giving all our healing power to that other person. Forgiveness is not what happens when someone says, "I'm sorry," and you say, "That's okay." That's reconciliation. It's an act of self-love, self-care, self-respect, and self-healing. It certainly doesn't mean that what that person did was okay or that they're getting away with something. It's the permission we give ourselves to let go of the pain of the past so that it does not define us for the future. This is where the issue of justice comes in, because justice is concerned with reestablishing harmony and balance. Anyone who is committed to the future must begin the work of moving beyond the past. I have reminded myself of that every day since November 6th. We who believe in justice cannot allow ourselves to hold on to anger and disappointment so tightly that we lose sight of who we truly are. The time that it takes to forward the same old memes regarding the 45th president can be put to better use. What's new? He's the same person now that he's been for the past 4 years. Let's use that energy more productively. We must continue being a liberal beacon and continue doing everything in our power to remind local and state representatives that they work for constituents, not the other way around. There's a story of a parable told by the Buddha. It's about a man who had been shot by a poison arrow, but who insisted, and I quote, "I will not let the surgeon pull out the arrow until I know the name and the clan of the man who wounded me, whether the bow that wounded me was longbow or crossbow, whether the arrow that wounded me was hoof-tipped or curved or barbed." End of quote. Now, in the Buddha's telling of the story, of course, the man died. Like the man with the arrow, if we wait until the transgressor seeks forgiveness, we will die of bitterness because it will eat away at our spirits like a slow growing cancer. That's exactly what will happen if we allow ourselves to be polarized into inaction by our anger at the way our world looks today. We've lived through much worse, and we've fought harder fights. My being able to bring this message to you is proof of that. An African American woman whose ancestors were brought to this country against their will, enslaved for 400 years, and continually marginalized today. By releasing ourselves, we'll be able to move on. If communities of faith find it difficult to forgive and reconcile, managing to hold on to grievances, what is the expectation for creating world peace? Just imagine how difficult it is for warring nations to overcome the cycle of retribution. Forgiveness nourishes faith in our personal process of becoming. It is an acceptance that we are more than the worst that we have done or experienced. And it is the possibility of a better yesterday or a better tomorrow. It is a commitment to the future. Perhaps it is so challenging for us religious liberals to seek forgiveness because forgiveness requires us to acknowledge our own shortcomings. But owning one's personal part in a conflict is freeing because it begins to liberate us from rigidity and blame. When we acknowledge that the person we are upset with is as full of weakness and vulnerability as each of us is, then we can see the other through the lens of our own humanity. Because we're human, there will be times when, out of fear or ignorance, or sometimes for malice or oppression, others will wound us. But this is when the opportunity of truly loving and forgiving reveals itself. Because forgiveness helps heal those wounds, and we must do that for ourselves. Happiness is a personal responsibility. We're called together to change our world one heart at a time, offering the opportunity for growth and healing. Moreover, the only way we will feel better about ourselves is by holding ourselves accountable for our conduct and then being at peace however others respond. You have everything you need to be happy, to love and care, to hope and to have faith. Wherever we may be in our families, our workplace, our leisure, or our communities of faith, we are simply human beings enfolded in our weaknesses and our hopes. If we want to become fully human, conquer divisions, and work for peace, we must learn to forgive. Just as every wrong that's been made right, someone needs to forgive and say, no more, because the future is too important to remain entangled in the wrongs of the past. There's no need to do this work alone. It helps being in a community that affirms our inherent worth and dignity and cultivates virtues like understanding and compassion that helps us to forgive and accept us not just for who we are, but where we are on our path to wellness and wholeness. From my heart to yours, may it be so. Please unite with me in a spirit of prayer and meditation as I offer these words. This is what we do with our faith. We bring into our hearts all those who have gone before us, all those whose living in the world has prepared the soil for our living, all those whose being has enabled our being. Let us also remember those whose existence is seated in our lives today. Not only those who are our physical descendants, but also those whose spirits inherit the love we sow, the hope we reap, the promise we harvest. And may those of us whose religious inheritance is freedom never rest until all who wish to be its children are sheltered. Amen. May it be so. The light of our virtual chalice has been extinguished, but not the flame of light in our heart. As we leave, remember, we are, therefore we love. We love, therefore we are. May we be humble before the wonder of what we dare to create. Go in peace.